There are moments in history that feel solid, anchored, fixed in place by dates, documents, and official records. We trust these moments because they are written down, because they are agreed upon, because history tells us they happened exactly when and how they did. But what if that trust is misplaced? What if some days never truly made it into the timeline? Not because nothing happened, but because something happened that could not be allowed to stand on its own. Before America standardized time, before national archives became centralized, before history was curated into textbooks and timelines, the past existed in fragments. Towns kept their own records, families kept journals, local newspapers printed events that mattered only to those nearby. Memory was personal, history was local. And in that fractured world, days could slip through the cracks. There are dates that appear in letters but not in archives. Events reported by multiple witnesses that never received an official timestamp. Days where something clearly occurred because people remembered it, but no one could later agree on when it happened. At first, this doesn't sound alarming. Early history is messy, records are incomplete, mistakes are inevitable. But when historians began comparing these discrepancies, a troubling pattern emerged. Some days were not merely forgotten, they were corrected, adjusted, absorbed into other dates, and eventually erased. In the early years of the American Republic, record-keeping was not about preserving truth, it was about maintaining coherence. History needed to make sense, timelines needed to flow. Contradictions were problems to be solved, not mysteries to be preserved. So when an event disrupted that flow, when it raised questions, created confusion, or challenged authority, it became easier to smooth it over than to explain it. A protest reported in 3 towns on 3 different days, a local uprising referenced in private diaries but never acknowledged officially. A sudden economic disruption blamed on market instability, despite eyewitness accounts describing something else entirely. These events didn't disappear overnight. They lingered on the margins, in footnotes, in unpublished letters, in archives rarely accessed, until eventually they vanished, because history does not like loose ends. And America, still defining itself, needed a past that appeared stable, especially when the future felt anything but. Erasing a day from history does not require fire or censorship. It requires something far quieter. Revision. Most erased days were not removed outright, they were reshaped. When multiple sources reported the same event on different dates, historians faced a choice: investigate deeper or consolidate. And consolidation was almost always the easier option. If 2 towns recorded unrest on consecutive days, those days became one. If eyewitnesses remembered events happening around the same time, precision was abandoned. If an incident could not be verified by official channels, it was quietly omitted. Over time, this practice became normalized. By the mid-19th century, American historians were not merely recording the past, they were organizing it. And organization required decisions. Which version becomes official? Which account is considered unreliable? Which day deserves to exist? Local newspapers were often dismissed as exaggeration. Personal diaries were labeled subjective. Oral histories were considered unstable. Only documents stamped by authority were deemed trustworthy. But authority, as it turns out, was selective. In several documented cases, entire days disappeared because acknowledging them would complicate a larger narrative. Days of labor unrest that conflicted with the idea of steady progress. Days of violence that contradicted claims of order. Days of political chaos that threatened the image of unity. Instead of confronting these contradictions, historians compressed them. A 3-day crisis became a brief disturbance. A spontaneous movement became a misunderstanding. A pivotal moment became a footnote, and the day itself, once filled with fear, action, and consequence, ceased to exist. What makes this unsettling is not that history simplified events, it's that people noticed. Letters from the period often reference that day without naming it. Journals speak of something that happened before everything changed, yet no official record marks such a turning point. These are not isolated anomalies. They appear again and again, scattered across decades. And when modern researchers attempt to reconcile them, they encounter silence. Archives that jump forward inexplicably, calendars with gaps, records that say nothing happened, despite overwhelming evidence that something did. History didn't deny these days. It It simply chose not to remember them. To understand why days were erased, you have to understand what history is for. History is not merely a record of events. It is a framework, a structure that allows societies to understand themselves, to teach values, to justify systems, to explain why things are the way they are. And frameworks cannot tolerate instability. A day that contradicts a narrative is dangerous. A day that exposes uncertainty undermines authority. A day that cannot be explained threatens credibility. In early America, this was especially true. The nation was fragile, divided, experimenting with identity. Every story mattered. Every moment contributed to the myth of progress, resilience, and inevitability. So when a day disrupted that myth, it became expendable. This doesn't require malice. Often it was done with good intentions. Historians believed they were protecting clarity. Leaders believed they were preventing panic. Institutions believed they were preserving trust. But in doing so, they made a critical decision. Some truths were less important than consistency, and consistency required sacrifice. The erased days were often moments of uncertainty, times when authority faltered, when systems failed, when outcomes were unclear, moments when America was not confident. By removing these days, history became smoother, cleaner, easier to teach, but also less honest. Because real history is chaotic. It does not move cleanly from one milestone to the next. It stumbles, it hesitates, it doubles back. Erasing days removed that hesitation, and in doing so, it reshaped memory itself. Generations grew up learning a version of the past where events flowed logically, decisions led predictably to outcomes, and progress was uninterrupted. But beneath that surface, the erased days lingered, quietly contradicting everything. Today, historians are beginning to notice these absences again, not because new evidence has surfaced, but because old evidence refuses to align. Digital archives make discrepancies easier to spot. Timelines once hidden across distant repositories now sit side by side, and when compared, they don't always agree. Events overlap incorrectly, dates drift, entire periods feel compressed, and slowly a realization emerges. History wasn't lying, it was editing. The erased days were not mistakes, they were decisions. Decisions about what could be remembered without destabilizing the story. Decisions about which uncertainties could be tolerated and which could not. This doesn't mean everything we know is wrong, but it does mean it is incomplete. And that incompleteness matters, because if days can be erased, so can causes, so can motives, so can responsibility. The past we inherit is not just what happened, it is what was allowed to remain. And that raises a question history cannot answer for us. If America once decided certain days were too dangerous to remember, what else was quietly adjusted? What else was smoothed over? What else still exists only in memory, waiting to be noticed? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, if days can disappear from history, how certain are we that the timeline we trust ever existed the way we think it did?